Because Frank missed his 4 children so much, he decided to travel across the country to visit them. So he asked each child a simple question.
You happy?
What do you mean?
You happy?
Yeah, of course I am.
Hearing that his daughter was happy, Frank's eyes were filled with joy, so when he faced his eldest son, Frank hoped to get the same answer.
And you're happy?
Happy? Yeah. I get paid to bang a big loud drum all day. Of course I'm happy.
But this time, Frank saw something wrong in his son's eyes. Frank was a little confused. The children were not happy. Why didn't they want to tell their father the real reason? In order to find out why the children were unhappy, Frank and the 4 children agreed to reunite on Thanksgiving. But on the night before Thanksgiving, a sudden phone call made all Frank's enthusiasm disappear. Frank's children were unable to attend the Thanksgiving reunion for various reasons. Frank's heart was full of regret and loss. But what could Frank say? Should Frank blame them? Frank just wanted to know if his children were happy. He stood in front of the mirror, and the huge sense of loss deepened Frank's longing for his children. So Frank made a bold decision. He wanted to cross the country to visit his 4 dearest children. At the same time, in order to give the children a surprise, Frank chose not to inform anyone. So he wrote 4 letters to the children. Then he packed his luggage. He took the items to suppress occupational diseases and set off on the journey. Frank was not sure how long he could walk. Because Frank had an occupational disease, the doctor told him to rest at home and not to take a plane. But Frank did not listen to the doctor's advice, because he missed his children too much. During the journey, Frank imagined the moment when he would reunite with his children. So he couldn't help showing the children's photos to the people around him. The eldest son is a music conductor, the youngest son is a painter, the youngest daughter is a famous dancer, the eldest daughter is a company executive. Whenever he talked about his children, Frank was very proud. Frank said that he had not achieved anything great in his life. As a worker who specialized in wrapping protective layers for electric wires, he could only wrap 1,000 feet of wires a week at work. He also raised 4 children through this job. But when he thought of his 4 children, Frank still couldn't hide his pride. Finally, Frank arrived at the door of his youngest son's apartment. He rang the doorbell for a long time, but no one opened the door. The night before Thanksgiving, Frank sat alone in front of the door waiting for his children to come back. So, Frank waited for a long time, but his son didn't come back at this time. A woman saw Frank. After a long time, Frank still didn't wait for his son to come home, so he left quietly. When Frank passed by a gallery, he saw a painting in the exhibition hall and saw his son's name under the work. Frank felt a little relieved when he saw the paintings in the exhibition hall. He thought his son might have gone out to play and didn't come home. So Frank found a 24-hour restaurant. He watched the news about the typhoon landing and chatted with the person next to him. But the other person talked about his family affairs.
I have 3 children, 6 grandchildren. They're busy. They're too busy to talk to me. I can make an appointment. They don't need anybody.
Frank didn't know how the other person changed from the typhoon to the children's problem. But the sudden resonance made Frank indescribable. He looked at the old man sitting in the corner and Frank felt sad. The next morning, Frank came to his son's door again. But this time a kind neighbor helped him open the door. Frank came to the door with heavy luggage and knocked. After waiting for a long time, no one opened the door. He didn't know where his son went, so Frank left his first letter and stuffed it into the crack of the door. Frank went to the next destination with regret. After a few days of running around, Frank finally arrived at his eldest daughter's door. Frank rang the doorbell, and this time his hope was not in vain. It was his daughter's son who opened the door. The boy's face was full of shock. He didn't know that Frank will come to his house at this time. The boy suddenly taught Frank a skill that all young people know. He unzipped and pulled out the luggage rod.
Oh, it's got a handle.
Well, of course it's got a handle. It's,
I didn't know that.
it's got wheels.
Such a simple thing for young people, but it seems so difficult when faced by the elderly. Because Frank has carried this heavy box across half of the country, the changes of the times have inevitably made them abandoned. When Frank walked out of the door and saw his eldest daughter making a phone call, Frank finally felt a little relieved. When the daughter saw her father, she was not as surprised as Frank imagined. Instead, she was a little sad. When Frank asked where his son-in-law was, his daughter hesitated and was unwilling to answer. Wait until the evening. The son-in-law hurried home. Although he bought some gifts, his face did not show any joy, but a kind of heaviness that was difficult to conceal. Frank saw some details. He confirmed his guess. There was indeed some kind of contradiction in his daughter's family, because when his daughter asked his son to bring hot sauce to her husband, his son directly chose to refuse.
You sure? Stop asking him. He's not stupid. He says no, he means no.
Frank took the opportunity to express his desire to stay for a few more days, but his daughter used various reasons to shirk that she had no time to take care of him, so he waited until the next day. Frank picked up the camera to record his daughter's house. Then he took a few photos. Frank didn't understand. Why is the daughter unwilling to confide her worries to her father? At the moment of separation at the station, Frank finally plucked up the courage to ask the question he had always wanted to ask.
You happy?
What do you mean?
You happy?
Yeah, of course I am.
A happy one. First one on my list.
After that, Frank left the second letter and turned to walk into the station. At this moment, there was a little more worry in his eyes that was difficult to conceal, because he had not seen his missing youngest son, and then found that there were some conflicts in the eldest daughter's family. But what Frank didn't understand was, why didn't the children want to tell him about this? After a few days of long journey, Frank came to the place where his eldest son worked. Frank once heard from his wife that his eldest son is now an excellent music conductor. However, when he stepped into the concert hall with joy, he found that the conductor on the stage was not his son. Frank saw his eldest son in an inconspicuous corner. Seeing his father suddenly appear, the eldest son had a mixture of surprise and panic. So the eldest son stopped his work and walked towards his father. The eldest son explained to his father. Those rumors about him being the band's conductor were lies that his mother wanted to tell Frank. He admitted that he could conduct and compose music, but now he chose to be a drummer. This job could bring him a good income and freedom. However, in Frank's heart, he thought that his son had received higher education, so he should have a broader stage, not just a drummer. Frank told his son that he wanted to stay here for a few more days, but his son stopped his father urgently and said that he would go to perform somewhere else tonight. After hearing this, Frank showed disappointment on his face. When the two parted, Frank asked the question in his mind again.
And you're happy?
Happy? Yeah. I get paid to bang a big loud drum all day. Of course I'm happy.
Frank wanted to shake hands and say goodbye, but they suddenly realized that a family should give a hug. Perhaps they had been silent to each other for too long. Just when Frank was about to push the door and leave, he couldn't help looking back. The son in front of him was still the smart, cute, and kind child. So he left the third letter and continued his journey. Frank was going to visit his last child. She is also the daughter who is farthest from home, but this time, the eldest son chose to tell his sister about his father's whereabouts. On the phone, his sister asked his brother why he didn't stay with his father for a few more days, but his brother said,
Yeah, I guess, I wanted to spend some time with him. I'm free tonight and tomorrow, but I just can't. I can't do it. I can't do it. I don't know what to say to him.
Many times we don't want to get along with our parents. It's an inexplicable feeling that always pulls us further and further away from them. Even if our parents just say a gentle greeting. Frank had been running around outside for so long that his body was already exhausted. So he came to a telephone booth. He missed home very much, especially his late wife. At this moment, only his late wife's voice could give him a little comfort. So Frank called his late wife. After no one answered, he finally heard the message his wife had recorded before her death.
I'm not here at the moment, and Frank is probably in the garden.
Perhaps hearing his wife's voice, Frank's empty heart was filled with a little warmth. Finally, Frank came to the exit and saw his little daughter. In Frank's eyes, the little daughter was still the lovely child. In order to welcome her father's arrival, the little daughter rented an extended car. This special thought made Frank very proud. Now the little daughter is already a famous dancer here. She lives in a spacious apartment and has prepared a large room for her father. Frank looked around, and every detail revealed his daughter's dedication and success. Frank believed that the little daughter really lived the happy life she wanted. At this time, the doorbell rang suddenly. The neighbor said that he had to go out for an emergency and hoped that his little daughter could help take care of the child. Before the little daughter could refuse, Frank readily agreed, because the father believed that taking care of children was not only a help, but also a kind of enjoyment. At night, the phone in the apartment rang suddenly. Frank accidentally heard the message from the phone.
It's me. Look, I need the apartment back sooner than I thought.
Frank realized that his little daughter's life might not be as good as other children. This insight did not make Frank choose to expose it. Instead, he felt a surge of self-blame in his heart. Perhaps it was his existence that added trouble and burden to his little daughter. So Frank decided to leave the next day. For him, it was enough to see the children with his own eyes. The youngest daughter wanted to keep her father, but her father had made up his mind. That night, they had a simple dinner. While chatting, Frank finally asked his doubts. Why do the children tell their mother everything but never confide in him? The youngest daughter gave her father an answer. Because her father had too high expectations for his children. The father always talked about his efforts and expectations but never really listened to the children's voices. But the mother was better at listening and understanding. Frank understood what his daughter said. In fact, Frank already knew the answer deep in his heart. But when the truth came out so bluntly from his children, Frank still seemed at a loss. For the return trip, Frank chose to fly. Before leaving, Frank did not ask the question of whether you were happy, because after meeting these children, he already had the answer in his heart. On the way back, Frank was due to occupational disease. He suddenly fell into a coma. In a trance, he dreamed that he went back many years ago when the children were still young.
How come you're home, Dad?
I took the day off work.
But you'd never do that.
I know, but I wanted to spend some time with you guys.
The children sat next to Frank. He asked the children why they lied to him. Although the children disguised themselves well, he still discovered the lies through their every move. Frank didn't understand. The children had so many situations and troubles in their lives, but they didn't tell him. The more Frank thought about it, the angrier he got. After his wife died, she gave the children to him. But in this situation, Frank didn't know how to explain to his wife. Actually, Frank understood. They have their own way to go, and they can only grow up after experiencing these things. But as a father, he still can't avoid worrying about his children. At this time, it suddenly rained heavily in the sky. In the rain, Frank opened his eyes and found himself lying on the bed. The children who had not had time to gather were all around him, but the youngest son still did not show up. The father wanted to know where the youngest son had gone, but the children were unwilling to answer and just told their father not to worry. The most important thing now was to take care of their health. At this moment, Frank felt that perhaps the youngest son had had an accident. Under the father's constant questioning, the eldest daughter finally told the truth.
David died, Dad. Sorry.
No, that's not true.
Frank finally realized that his previous obsession and expectations might be too harsh. He began to understand that as long as the children were happy, that was the most important thing. After being discharged from the hospital, Frank came to the gallery of his youngest son. He wanted to buy his son's paintings, but the clerk told Frank that the painting had been bought by someone else. The lost Frank was ready to leave. At this time, the clerk guessed Frank's identity. The clerk found another painting of the youngest son in the warehouse. The clerk told Frank that Frank's youngest son once said that this was the painting he was most satisfied with and that he would never sell it. When the painting was slowly displayed, tears appeared in Frank's eyes, because the scene in the painting was just a row of ordinary wires. The technique was very simple, even like a child's sketch. There was no magnificence or complexity. However, for Frank, this painting was of great significance. Those simple wires were not just the lines drawn by the youngest son. They were also the youngest son's deep understanding and expression of his deep love for his father. It's Christmas again. But this time, Frank didn't ask the children to come home as strongly as he did in previous years. He learned to let go. He learned to give them more space and freedom. But when Frank was decorating the house, the children also appeared beside him. Frank now understands that he doesn't need to put his demands on the children, because this will lead to no one willing to tell him the truth. So Frank began to change himself, learn to listen, learn to understand. The happiness we pursue throughout our lives is nothing more than the most ordinary family affection in the world. The health of parents and the gentle relationship between family members are the greatest wealth in this life.